It's rather hard to miss something that we never had. It's hard to appreciate what we do have until we lose it. Restoring what was lost is sometimes, well, it's something only those affected can truly understand. How can we appreciate what we have never lost, much less having it restored? We only grieve what has significance to us. What is significant to you and to me are going to be different things. Whether we speak of objects, honors, accomplishments, relationships, or something else entirely. The joy of restoration is caught up in the value that we attach to what we lose. How do we grapple with restoration from God's perspective? I understand that Elon Musk earned an entry in the Guinness Book of World Records last month, or in the last few months, for the greatest amount of personal wealth ever to be lost. $182 billion in a span of 2 years. Then a week or two ago, he lost $29 billion in a single day. I don't know about you, but I strain to wrap my mind around the concept of a billion. I can go from 1 to 10. I can see that. I can picture that. I can go from 10 to 100. And I can make sense of that. I can get a rough idea of what that looks like. I could never, maybe visualize 1,000. But that's pushing it, isn't it? To really grasp what 1,000 really means. I continuously hold on to the notion of multiplying each decimal place by a factor of 10, and I can write it out, and I can do my math and all of that without a single problem. But I could never visualize my 16 million neighbors in the city of São Paulo when I was growing up. The difference between 1 million neighbors in Recife and 26 million neighbors in the greater São Paulo metropolitan area was invisible. It was lost on me. They were just numbers on a page. I knew the idea, but it really made no sense. A week ago, at our house, we expected an unknown number of kittens to be born. Sunday night, they began making their appearance. 2 days later, we noticed a major problem with one of them. More than a cleft palate, this kitten had a septum dividing his incomplete mouth, making it impossible to eat. There was nothing to do for him. How can we shift to grieve a new life barely within our awareness, and yet already deemed precious? Came home from the vet without that kitten, and Mama recognized that that cat was missing somehow. She moved the other 4 somewhere else. There's no way to grieve the loss of 100 people, is there? 1,000? 1 million? 6 million people? No more significantly than we can grieve the loss of one single loved one. In fact, that one loved one has more meaning in that loss than all those others combined, doesn't it? The one is within our reach. It's within our understanding. The millions remain beyond what we can conceive, much less relate to meaningfully. Might drive through what used to be a thriving community and see house after house after house, vacant, abandoned, crumbling, neglected, or destroyed. But there is only so much we can process in that experience. There's only so much attention that we can give. Jesus tackles that problem by focusing attention on the few, the one. He portrays a shepherd with 100 sheep, each one of them valuable. We can understand that, right? 100 sheep would have been a significant flock for the time. Nothing extraordinary, but nothing to sneer at either. It was likely that there was more than one shepherd involved in caring for 100 sheep. It was very likely that 100 sheep would not belong to a single person, but would belong to several families. The shepherd here has ample resources. They're not wealthy by our concepts, but the resources are ample. With many sheep under his care, the loss of one would be a blow, but it's hardly an economic disaster. Recovering from a 1% loss is within reach of recovery, right? A shepherd today expects to lose about 5% of their flock annually. Especially when it comes around to lambing time. Sheep getting ill, having issues with the birthing process. 5% is a industry standard average of what you expect to lose. You expect to replace more than that, but you expect to lose about 5%. Losing one sheep back in Jesus' day should not have been a huge deal, right? They would have been losing much more than 5% on an annual basis. But this shepherd is concerned enough about this single sheep to abandon the rest in order to restore it to the fold. Upon restoring it, his joy is ample reason to celebrate. His friends and neighbors can easily understand his celebrating. The flock is restored. The flock is whole. He has good news to share with family, friends, neighbors. Then Jesus shifts to smaller numbers, where the loss of one has a greater proportional impact. We find a widow with 10 silver coins in her possession. This is by no means great wealth, but it is likely this is what she depended on for her maintenance, for her day-to-day support. She's not in the position of the widow who brings her 2 little copper coins to the temple treasury, that was all that she had. But a silver coin in the day is a day's wage for anybody except a shepherd. A shepherd would get maybe half of that. She's lost a tenth of her retirement account. And this is the little bit of surplus she had to give her some cushion, a little space to negotiate in some kind of trade. The loss of one coin is significant, not because its worth is that of a sheep. A sheep was easily worth 10 to 20 of her coins. But these coins were likely her or her family's life savings. They represented all of her wealth, all of her provision for the future. Losing one was a disaster. Finding it was reason for celebration and joy to share with friends and neighbors. Upping the ante, Jesus shifts to a father with two sons. The sons are not the whole of his wealth, but they represent the whole of his future, his expectation of a legacy, of any lasting impact on the world, of being remembered, of making any kind of mark for the future. One of the two asks for an early division of the inheritance. He wants to make his own way in the world. This is a child saying to his father, "You're dead to me." There's no legal imperative that the father honor such a request. But in grace, he does. The younger son departs, abandoning not only the father, but all connection to his rearing, to his relationships, his community, traditions, his country of birth. When life goes awry and a famine has hit this new country of his residence, he falls into despair. At this point, when life has turned its very darkest, he resolves to return home. But he's burned all of his bridges. He's cut his ties with everything that gave him any sense of belonging there. But he knows that his father's slaves and servants had it much better than what he is experiencing. So he immigrates home. Along the way, he rehearses a speech for his father, an apology, recognizing that he has abandoned his standing as a son. That was a privilege that he had given up when he departed. He had given it up along with his share of his father's wealth that he squandered. When he at last comes before the father, he begins his rehearsed speech, but the father seems to cut him off before he can finish. His well-considered and drafted apology becomes useless because his father ignores the half of it, reinstating him as though this son had never left. The father commands preparations for a celebratory feast. He clothes his son in the best he has to offer him. He grants those things associated with being the son he had always been, symbols of his position. As the party begins to come together and gather steam, the elder brother returns from working a field under the father's direction. Discovering a celebration is underway to mark his lost brother's return, he's put out. He refuses to approach. He refuses to take any part in the celebration of this brother's return. He feels displaced, ignored, overlooked, devalued. This brother had disowned their father. This brother had given up any and all rights in the family. He had walked away from his responsibilities, leaving everything up to his elder brother to work and manage. He had taken from their father's bounty and he had wasted it all. He was returning now, hat in hand, to be a further burden on their father, and taking more from what remained of his inheritance. It all rightly belonged to him, the eldest brother. The celebration was an affront. Who honors and throws a party for a thief, a scoundrel, a murderer? Criticisms of the religious community against Jesus befriending the wretched and sinners of the community found reflection in the attitudes of this elder brother. They were not concerned with such as these who were not lifting a finger to follow God's instructions, to honor the law, to set aside personal cares, desires, and concerns in order to be faithful to God. As they saw it, Jesus' acceptance of who they considered unworthy was a rejection of their hard-earned standing before God. Jesus saw it all differently. God's highest priority was in restoring all people to the status of loved children. All people. There's no jockeying for position. There's no earning a place. There is no competition or ranking for importance. Every sheep of the fold belongs equally to the flock. Each of the 10 coins has the very exact same value, doesn't it? Each of the sons belongs equally to the Father and is covered in the very same love. God does not make distinctions to value some of us over others, to elevate some of us, to embrace some of us, to ignore some of us, to write off some of us as unworthy. That's what human beings do. We don't have the capacity to embrace all as God does. Is it too hard to refuse to exclude? To allow God to restore all, everyone? To allow God to love those people that make us uncomfortable? God calls us to rejoice when anyone is restored at long last. Anyone. Is that too hard a thing for us?